Right, let's talk energy now. Holyrood's Net Zero Committee is expected to release an update this week on the Scottish Government's progress on achieving net zero by 2045. One measure, which the Scottish Government is introducing to hit the target, is low emission zones in cities across Scotland. Now, a low emission zone means a daily charge if your vehicle is driven within the zone parameters. So is this the answer? Well, let's speak to Dr. Jacqueline Redmond, the Executive Director of the Power Networks Demonstration Centre at Strathclyde University, and she works on plans to decarbonise transport. Good morning to you, Dr. Redmond.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, and I hope you are as well. Are we getting it right when it comes to decarbonisation, do you think?
Well, I think we're heading in the right direction, if that's not too much of a pun when it comes to transport. I think, it's a whole systems approach is required. It's a bit of everything. I think personally the low emission zones will help us, although I know there are some people who have concerns about their implementation.
And what more then can be done to speed up this process?
I think, from a transportation perspective, from the domestic vehicles, we're kind of stuck just now because, strangely enough, because of the war in Ukraine, is actually implementing some real delays in the supply chain for electric vehicles. But I think we have the right policies in place and we're heading in the right direction. I think there's more to be looked at along aviation, shipping and potentially even rail transport as well. And I think that's where we can make some big changes. The crux to this, though, is whether or not hydrogen is going to become viable as a fuel. And this is a worldwide challenge just now, getting the right technology in place and making sure it's efficient and competitive. And it's quite interesting that already just this month I'm seeing some of the existing hydrogen suppliers are calling force majeure in some of their contracts to actually be able to supply hydrogen. So that is going to be a challenge for us.
Dr. Redmond, it's difficult to keep everyone happy all the time, isn't it? And, I speak to taxi drivers a lot because they're an interesting barometer of public opinion. I'm also from the northeast of Scotland. So, there is a lot of people very, very reliant on oil and gas for their jobs. So I suppose, do you recognise the concerns that some people have about this term just transition? Taxi drivers are saying it's going to cost them a lot to operate, for example, in the centre of Glasgow. Do you think enough's being done to allay these fears and I suppose explain the positive consequences of what's been done?
So I think we do need to do more on the education of the positive consequences. Scottish researchers recently produced a report that said if we could actually maintain all of our roads within the legal requirement levels for air pollution, we'd actually reduce NHS admissions by 10%, which of course then has a knock-on benefit of a reduced cost for the NHS and social care. I think when it comes to taxi drivers, I know that they have been talking a lot, particularly with the Glasgow Council over the last year and a half leading up to this. And there was some support put in place to allow them to convert their vehicles to make sure they were compliant. Unfortunately, the fund that was put in place was so popular, it's now it's ran out of cash for this financial year. So hopefully the government will be able to find some more budget to be able to help the taxi drivers continue. If I can move on to the oil and gas issue you raised as well, because that is really interesting. Because I don't think well, that's not true. There are some people, places who say stop all oil and gas. But I think in reality, it's not going to be the case. But what we can do is work with the oil and gas sector to help them decarbonise. And there's a project going on in Shetland just now called the Orion Project. It's looking about how do we take the excess offshore and onshore wind that's getting generated there, create hydrogen that can be then used to decarbonise the activities of the offshore oil rigs. So while we have to accept that in the short to potentially medium term, oil is going to have a necessity, we actually produce that with as low an impact as possible.
Are you optimistic when you think about the future and what can be achieved in terms of net zero, Jacqueline?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I'm so enthusiastic. And the opportunity for Scotland is immense. I think what's key is getting the right skills, making sure, because just now we're actually struggling with a skills gap and not getting enough people with the right skill set.
How do we do that?
Oh, gosh, that's, it's across so many different skills, and there are some really good organisations set up just now to look at that. You've got the Net Zero Technology Centre based in Aberdeen. They've got a skills programme. You've got the MSIP programme based in Dundee, which is where the old Michelin tyre factory was. And of course, the NMIS, the National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland, based in Shannon. of all working with schools and educators to try and work out how we get the right skills. And of course, it's not just young people coming out of university, it's helping people who have a small garage and are used to servicing the traditional petrol engine, helping them understand how they move forward and can start to service electric vehicles.
OK, well, we're running out of time, unfortunately. We'll get you back on. Might get some taxi drivers on as well with you next time. That's Dr. Jacqueline Redman, their Executive Director at Strathclyde University.